All right, back out here Sunday morning at the property. About to get back to work on the K3500. And nice clear morning. Sun's coming up. So I want to talk specifically about GM NV4500 4x4 transmissions. And I've got two of them here. The broken one that came out of my truck and a replacement. And I think this is going to be pretty important information for anybody who doesn't know about what I'm about to go over. So the main thing, the reason why these are GM specific is the length of the main shaft and tail section over a Dodge NV4500. If you look at a Dodge NV4500, it's real easy to tell real quick that it's a Dodge, because 4x4 that is, because the tail section will have two provisions for bolts, and I believe that was for the transfer case shifter. The GMs don't have that. Plus, this tail section is about 1 3/8 longer on a GM than a Dodge. You can see here the additional length is this area. This is where a counterweight goes. This transmission does not have that counterweight. This transmission does. I'll shine that up. See right there in the back? There's the counterweight. Now both these have the 5th gear lock nut on them. This transmission's rebuilt. This one was rebuilt about 2 years ago, and I don't even think I have 7,000 miles on it, and it's broken. And I went over a couple other videos right there. 5th gear, you see 5th gear is gone. I think 4th gear might be gone too. So that's the first thing. And here's a look. Here's the tail section off this transmission, which is the same as this transmission right here. But here's a look at what I'm talking about. See, there's no bolt holes on the side of the tail housing like that would be on a Dodge. Again, I think it's for the transfer case shifting mechanism. So there's that. The next important thing, which I just learned this, is that on the GM NV4500, whether it's a 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, and again, these are both 4-wheel drive transmissions, the different years have different cases. They're just slightly different. And the difference is the input shaft bearing retainer diameter and the bolt pattern for the bell housing. So I have a 12-valve Cummins in this truck. You see this on my other videos. This truck's been together and running for about 2 years. It is a 4-wheel drive truck. I've got the Dodge aluminum backing plate on the motor, and I've been using this Dodge Chrysler bell housing. I'm running the external slave cylinder, hydraulic slave cylinder, so I still have the mechanical throwout bearing right here. Throwout bearing and arm assembly. There's my clutch and flywheel assembly. So I bought this transmission, had this thing built, and no one's fault specifically, but I didn't really specify the year. It turns out that this smaller diameter, you see the difference? This diameter versus this. This is for a 94 and earlier GM truck. So this is a 94 and earlier, from what I've researched and been told, GM NV4500 housing. Also, look at the bolt pattern. So the top bolt pattern is the same. Look at the bottom bolt pattern. See how these bolt holes are lower? These are higher. So the bell housing will go on both transmissions, but the lower bolt holes are not there. So I have to drill this case. So that's one thing I've got to do. The next major hurdle that I had is when I bought the replacement transmission, it came with this smaller 1 1/8 10 spline 22 tooth input shaft gear. And I thought I was good because this is a 10 spline Dodge clutch, 12 valve clutch. Well, the problem is that 1 1/8 is too small for that clutch assembly. You need 1 1/4 inches. So this gear, all rebuilt, so all new parts in this transmission. That's a Torque King 4x4 transmission. Came with this setup, with this bearing retainer and this seal, and there is a oil hole right there. That index is in the top of the case of the transmission. So that lines up. So I was like, okay, no problem. This is the shaft from this transmission, which this transmission again had been rebuilt 2 years ago, not a lot of miles. So this shaft is still pretty new. It's in really good shape. So I pulled this shaft out, figured no big deal. I'll put this shaft in this transmission. This is a 22 tooth 10 spline, 1 1/4 inches, and it's longer also. Problem is with that is that there is the bearing retainer from the, we'll call it 95 and later case. Okay, you see the size difference? This larger bearing retainer would not go in my replacement transmission, which is, you know, a 94 and earlier case, because of that opening, that diameter inside the case, if that's making sense. Gears are all the same, 22 tooth gear, 22 tooth gear. They both shafts will switch and spline up between both transmissions, but you can't get the bearing retainer on there. So called Torque King, I called Long Range Gear, and they all told me the same thing. It's like, I got to send the transmission in, I got to have the case swapped, or I got to swap the case myself. There's no solution. No one made a bearing retainer for a 1 1/4 inch diameter Dodge NV4500 and 96 and later GM NV4500 transmission to go in an earlier case. So what I did is I went to a local machine shop, found a guy that was nice enough to deal with me, and he machined this down for me. So here you go. My point of all this is that this can be done. I was told it couldn't, and there you go. So I went to the machine shop, if I can get these to stop rolling around, and I had a guy, he turned this was thicker, he turned this down to match this, so the diameters are the same, and there's plenty of material left on there. He also slotted, because he couldn't drill straight through, the bolt holes to line up with this bolt pattern. So now what I have is I have a solution, and I think it's a good one. There's my correct 1 1/4 inch input shaft, cage bearing, all that. That's how that looks. There you go. Shaft is in the transmission. There's the oil hole, so that index is up again with the top of the case. I've got a new seal to put on this today, and look at this. I've already bolted this down, obviously, so this thing lines up perfectly. So problem solved. The shaft, the correct size shaft, is now in this transmission. So all I have to do here this afternoon is get the bell housing back on, and I've already fit the bell housing. The bearing retainer indexes the bell housing, and the top two bolts line up, so I just have to drill through the case, which will be a bit of a bear, the bottom two holes, and I'll be good to go. So I'm hoping that makes sense, and that helps out anybody who's in the middle of doing something like this or about to, you really got to pay attention to the case year case, if you will, of these transmissions when you're doing any kind of a swap like this. This transmission would have worked fine basically like on an LS, from what I was told, with this smaller 1/8" input shaft, but obviously not with what I'm doing. And this transmission's all built inside. It's got heavier duty gears and parts inside it. I also have, let's talk shifter tops. Even though this is a 95 and newer, I'll just call this large case GM NV4500 4x4 transmission, it has the older 94 and earlier shifter top. So there's no, you're stuck with this shifter. You can't do any kind of shifter swapping, short shifter, modern shifter. This transmission, when I got it, I had them put the newer shifter top on it. See how it's a 4-bolt? This is like the Dodges. So this is just a standard shifter. You can get a short throw shifter. You got other options. So this is a better shifter top. So normally this top would come on the 95 and newer transmission, and this top would come on the 94 and older, if that makes sense. So that's what I got. Again, hope that helps someone, because I was sitting here for a couple days trying to figure out how I'm going to get this resolved, but luckily I'm there, and that's where we're at. So I'll be getting this truck back together this week and back on the road, and that's it.